The wind was soft that night, brushing against the pine needles with a whisper only I seemed to hear. Fog rolled low across the trail, hiding the jagged rocks and roots I was careful not to trip on. My flashlight's pale beam flickered once, twice, and then held steady, illuminating shapes that didn't belong. Somewhere up ahead, a low humming echo between the trees, neither human nor animal. I thought it was the wind at first, but then the air felt heavier, almost watching me. Every step I took felt louder than the last, though the forest remained hushed, as if holding its breath. That's when I saw it, a shadow shifting just beyond the trees, too tall, too wrong, but almost familiar. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, and I froze, wishing I could turn back. But I couldn't. Something in the fog was waiting, something that shouldn't exist. I never should have taken that path. The wind had stopped. Only the pines breathed. A fog lingered low, curling around gnarled roots. I remember walking beneath them. The earth was soft, damp, smelling of moss and decay. Shadows stretched long, reaching toward me, yet never touching. A name drifted through the trees. Quiet, barely there. My own name. I froze. The branches above whispered together, and the air seemed to shiver. Something moved just out of sight, a shape that bent and swayed like smoke. The ground pressed cold beneath my shoes. I stepped forward. Each footfall swallowed in silence, yet the whisper returned. Closer now, a trembling in the air, like the forest itself was breathing around me. A pale light flickered between the trunks, not bright enough to see clearly, but enough to make shadows twitch and twist. I reached toward it. My hand passed through the mist. Nothing, yet the feeling lingered, warm, watchful, almost alive. A rustle behind me. Soft, deliberate. I turned. Nothing, just the sway of a branch, or maybe not. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, matching the rhythm of the forest. The whisper came again, closer, insistent. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was waiting. The light moved. I followed. Moss cushioned each step, but I felt the pull of something below, a subtle tug at the edges of my mind. The shapes shifted. Darkness pressed against the pale flicker, and I could see eyes. Or was it just reflections of my own? Every tree seemed alive now, leaning, bending, stretching toward me. I paused. The whisper faded. Only the hum of the forest remained, soft, vibrating through my chest. A leaf fell somewhere behind me. I didn't hear it land. The light vanished. A stillness settled, heavy and intimate. I could feel the forest watching, the damp air brushing against my skin like fingertips. I wanted to leave. My feet wouldn't move. The silence held me there. A part of me was already gone, lost in the hum and shadow and the echo of my own name. Then, just as slowly as it began, the whisper faded completely. The pines were still. I was alone, yet I couldn't shake the sense that something had followed me, slipping between shadows, patient, waiting, unseen. The fog thinned. The moss felt warmer under my touch. The wind returned, gentle, brushing my hair. I walked on, but the forest had changed, and I knew it was not the same place I had entered. I would hear my name again. I was sure of it. The pines never truly let go. The morning had been quiet. Mist clung to the trees like cobwebs. The trail was slick with dew, each step soft against wet pine needles. Then the fog rolled in, thick, heavy as wool. It swallowed the path behind me, curling around my ankles, curling around my chest. Water gurgled somewhere beneath fallen logs. I paused. The smell of wet earth and rotting leaves filled the air. Every breath tasted damp, metallic, close. A shape crouched near the creek. I couldn't see it clearly. Its movements were off, slow, deliberate, like it was copying a human from memory. My chest tightened. I stepped forward. The fog clung to my legs, cold and wet. I reached the edge of the bank. It wasn't there, only ripples on the water, and the mist curling like smoke from a dying fire. I scanned the area, but the creek was empty, and yet I could feel it had been watching. Saw footsteps, or maybe the echo of them. The sound pressed against my ears. Every shadow stretched longer, twisting with the fog. The air hummed with something just beyond sight. The creek moved under fallen logs. The water whispered and churned around them, and I felt a pull in my stomach. a knowing that whatever had been there was still near, just beyond the curve of fog and shadow. I could smell it then, a wet, earthy scent, tinged with something I couldn't place, something old and sharp. The hairs on my arms lifted, though the fog was thick and still. I took another step. The shape might have moved, or maybe the fog had shifted. It crouched, leaning, silent, its outline strange against the creek bank. I didn't dare look too long. The world narrowed to breath, to heartbeat, to the low hum of water over stones. The figure vanished. Nothing left but fog and the gurgle of the creek. I knelt on the bank, letting the damp seep into my fingers. The cold water slid between rocks and moss. For a moment the fog thinned, and I thought I saw movement, something fleeting. Then it returned, thick and endless. I stood, shivering, aware of how alone I was. The trail had disappeared. The pines swallowed everything. I walked on, each step careful, slow. The fog pressed against my chest. Every rustle sounded louder, every shadow deeper. By the time I reached the far bank, the creek was quiet. No trace of it remained. And yet, I could still feel the wrongness, the memory of a shape crouched near the water, watching, waiting, gone, but not gone. The mist clung to the trees as I moved away, and I knew it would follow, soft, patient, like a breath against my neck. The fog thinned as I reached a break in the trees. A clearing opened before me, bathed in pale moonlight. The air smelled cold and wet, sharp with the scent of frost and pine. Soft footsteps slowed. My breath puffed in little clouds. The ground was damp beneath my shoes, each step pressing into moss and fallen leaves. Then I saw them, hundreds of eyes, gleaming from the treeline, round, bright, watching. They blinked all at once. A pause fell over the clearing, heavy, thick, pressing against my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The silence held me like a weight, and I felt the forest inhale with me. Shadows shifted in the corners of my vision. Every tree seemed alive now, leaning closer, stretching toward the pale light. The air hummed faintly, vibrating against my skin. The eyes blinked again. Slowly, deliberately, a faint rustle drifted through the underbrush, like something brushing past another shadow. I tried to breathe quietly. The cold touched my fingers and cheeks, a chill that seemed to reach deeper than skin. Each blink felt like a heartbeat, each silence like a held breath in my chest. Then one by one, the lights vanished. Gone. The treeline was empty again. I was alone. The clearing was quiet. Only my own heartbeat and the soft hum of the forest. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling it still thrum. The damp earth pressed cool beneath me. The moonlight stretched long shadows, but they were empty. I took a slow step forward. Soft, careful. Every rustle of leaves whispered back at me, as if remembering the eyes that had been there. The clearing waited, silent, watching through the absence of those eyes. And I knew they had not truly left, only hiding, patient, waiting for me to move again. I walked on, leaving the pale light behind. The fog returned in gentle waves, wrapping around my shoulders and brushing my hair. I was alone, but the memory of that gaze clung to my skin, soft and constant, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The hollow opened slowly before me. Fog clung to the ground, curling around fallen roots. The air smelled of wet leaves and something older, faintly metallic. A low hum filled the space, vibrating, steady, almost like a heartbeat, but not mine. It pressed against my chest, making each breath heavier. The mist thickened with every step. Footfalls were swallowed by damp earth. The hollow seemed to move around me, its edges blurred, uncertain. Branches twitched. Not with wind, not with animals. Something deliberate. Eyes traced me, though I saw nothing. A feeling crawling along my skin, cold, soft, constant. The hum shifted, rising slightly. A vibration through the soles of my feet. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs, wet and heavy. I paused, letting the quiet push against me. Even the air seemed to watch. A glimpse behind a tree. Movement. A shadow crouched there, bending strangely, then vanished into nothing. The hollow held its breath. The hum softened, then returned, slower, deliberate. I felt the weight of unseen attention pressing from every direction. The moss beneath my fingers was damp, The air tasted metallic, as if the hollow itself had a pulse. Each step forward was careful, cautious. The mist closed in behind me, erasing the trail. Every rustle of leaves or brush of branch seemed amplified. A static vibration hummed in my ears. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but the pressure remained. A quiet rhythm beneath my ribs that wasn't mine. Something waited, patient, just beyond sight. I stopped. The fog thickened further, almost tactile, curling around my arms and face. The hum steadied again, a low, breathing pulse. Silence pressed in after a few heartbeats. Soft, thick. It made my skin prickle, my hair lift. I walked on slowly. The hollow seemed endless, its walls blurred and alive. I could feel the unseen eyes, tracing, waiting. The vibration lingered as I left. A memory pressed into my chest. And though I stepped back onto firmer ground, the hum stayed behind. Soft, patient, unseen but never gone. The trail twisted sharply, disappearing around a bend. Mist hung low, curling over roots and stones. The smell of wet earth and pine needles pressed close to my nose. Then I heard it, footsteps behind me. Not my own, perfectly synchronized. Every crack of a twig matched mine. I stopped. The forest was silent. Yet the echo lingered, tracing my movements with uncanny precision. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only fog curling between the trees. Only branches swaying, brushing against each other like whispers. Each step I took, they followed. Soft, careful, relentless. The air seemed thicker now, heavier, pressing against my skin, filling my lungs with cold dampness. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision. Every rustle became louder, sharper, as though the forest itself was mimicking my movements. I could feel eyes, unseen, tracking each footfall. I tried to quicken my pace. The footsteps sped too, matching me exactly. Panic rose like a slow tide, and yet the forest remained still. No wind, no bird, no animal. Just my echo and its echo. The trail narrowed. Roots reached for my ankles. Mist brushed my face. Every breath felt thick, damp, metallic. I stopped again. Footsteps stopped too. Silence pressed down. Thick, almost tactile. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating with my heartbeat. One step forward. The footsteps returned. Behind me, soft, deliberate. Not matching the rhythm exactly now. Slightly delayed, but still there, still following. I turned slowly, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the fog. But nothing moved, only the trail, winding, endless, and the quiet echo that had become my companion. The forest silence grew oppressive. It pressed into my ears, filled the gaps between my heartbeat and breath. The fog thickened around my shoulders, cold and damp, like it was clutching at me. I walked on, soft steps, careful, slow, every rustle, every crack beneath my feet, answered by that echo I could not place. I felt alone. I felt watched, and I felt mirrored. By the time the trail straightened, the footsteps behind me had stopped. Or maybe I had simply stopped noticing. The fog drifted, curling around trees and roots. The forest waited, quiet, patient, and I kept moving, leaving behind the sound that had followed me, but knowing it had left its memory pressed into the path forever. The ridge appeared through the fog before me. The air was sharp with cold, carrying the scent of wet stone and pine. The trail underfoot was slick, pressed into mud and moss. I glimpsed it atop the ridge. Tall, pale, unnaturally still. Fog curled around its long limbs, draping them in gray like a cloak. Its head tilted slightly, watching. A quiet weight pressed through the mist, heavy, patient, silent. I froze, breath shallow. The world had narrowed to shadow and fog. My flashlight flickered. A brief pulse of light revealed only the shape, then darkness again. The ridge held its silence. Its gaze, though I could not be certain, felt fixed, curious, calculating, waiting. I could smell the damp stone, the fog curling around it, as though the watcher's presence made the air colder, sharper. The hairs on my arms lifted. Soft wind rustled the nearby branches. It moved around the shape, but did not disturb it. The figure remained, long, lean, pale, like a memory pressed against a ridge. I took a step forward. It did not move, not a breath, Not a twitch, yet the stillness hummed with attention, thick, vibrating against my chest. The flashlight flickered again. A brief moment of clarity. I caught the curve of its shoulders, the tilt of its head, the impossible length of its arms. Then darkness reclaimed the ridge. I could only hear the faint hum of my own breathing. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs, soft and cold, like it was pushing me down. I wanted to look away. Couldn't. The pale watcher seemed to draw the eye, magnetic, patient, silent. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time was muffled, uncertain. The ridge seemed to lean closer, the fog curling like fingers around the figure. I stepped back slowly. The watcher remained, still, silent. Its gaze, real or imagined, followed me. The fog began to thin as I moved away. The ridge receded. The shape faded into shadow. I kept walking. Soft footsteps pressed into damp moss. The chill lingered along my skin, and though the ridge disappeared behind me, I could still feel its attention, pale, quiet, watching from the fog. The campsite was familiar. Moonlight pooled over the clearing. The scent of damp earth and smoldering pine lingered in the air. Something felt off. The items I'd left scattered neatly before were shifted. A bag leaned sideways. A cooking pot lay closer to the fire than I remembered. The tent flap moved slightly. No wind stirred, only the soft rustle of fabric, brushing against the frame. I stepped closer. The smell of wet canvas mixed with smoke and pine. Every nerve in me stretched, tight and alert. The clearing seemed smaller, confined by unseen eyes. Rustling continued. Not the trees, not the breeze. Footsteps subtle, circling, cautious. Invisible. Shadows leaned beyond the firelight. Tall, stretched, shifting as if breathing. I could feel them there, tracing my movements, just at the edge of my sight. The firelight flickered against the ground. Every log, every stone threw longer shadows. And in those shadows, I thought I saw movement, soft, deliberate, impossible to place. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the unseen. Each footstep pressed into moss muted. The rustling followed, patient, teasing, wrapping the campsite in tension. The air felt heavy, damp against my skin. Breath caught in my chest. Every sense sharpened. The smell of the earth, the faint tang of smoke, even the whisper of pine needles overhead. All seemed amplified. I paused. The rustling stopped. Only the fire hummed quietly. The shadows pressed closer in the corners of my vision. Stillness pressed against me. Then it returned, a soft, deliberate movement behind a log. The firelight shifted, revealing nothing. The clearing was empty, yet I could feel it, the presence lingering beyond the circle of flame. I sat on a fallen log, every muscle tense. The tent flap moved again. Soft, slow, the rustling circled once more, then faded, leaving only the quiet of night and the faint crackle of the fire. The campsite waited. Shadows leaned. The air hummed with unspoken attention. I remained still, breathing slowly, feeling the invisible eyes tracing me, and knowing I was not alone. I followed the familiar trail. Damp earth pressed against my boots. The smell of pine and wet moss filled the air, but the path curved unnaturally. Each bend seemed longer than it should be. The forest grew dense, silent, and strange. Trees leaned closer, their trunks reflecting each other in odd symmetry. Shadows repeated shapes I had already passed. I blinked, but nothing changed. Landmarks vanished. Rocks, roots, even the faint slope of the ground, erased. Every tree looked the same, every branch identical. The fog thickened. Cold moisture clung to my hair, my arms. A soft hum rose beneath the silence. I felt the forest shift around me. The trail wound deeper, and the isolation pressed in. No bird, no rustle of animal. Just the echo of my own footsteps, swallowed instantly by the earth. I tried to turn back, but the path was gone. Only the forest repeated endlessly, mirrors of bark and shadow reflecting nothing familiar. The air smelled damp and metallic, and my breath came shallow. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the forest weighed me down, pressing me into its soil. Branches twitched, but the movement was slow, deliberate, not wind or life. Something watching, following. I stopped. The silence pressed against my ears. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath. I reached out to a tree. Its bark was cold, wet, unnervingly smooth, like the same tree repeated 1,000 times. The trail had led nowhere. Only the hum, the fog, the mirrored forest. I was alone, yet every instinct told me I was not. I took a slow step forward. The repetition of shapes shifted slightly, almost like a sigh, or the forest acknowledging my presence. The mist curled around my legs. The smell of damp earth filled my senses. The forest waited silently, patient, immense, and I kept moving deeper into the unknown. The trail behind me erased, the path ahead uncertain. The cold hit before I saw it, biting, unnatural. It seeped through my coat into my bones. Each exhale formed thick clouds. They lingered too long, swirling in the mist. I could see my breath twisting against the night, heavy, almost alive. Shapes moved through the fog, slow, silent, shifting at the edge of vision. No rustle of leaves, no snapping of twigs, just movement impossible to place. I stepped forward. The earth was frozen, hard under my boots. Ice and frost clung to fallen branches. The mist curled around my legs like fingers. A rustle to my left. I spun, breath catching. The space was empty, only the mist rolling over moss and stone. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. Each footstep pressed into silence. Every shape that flickered in the fog vanished before I could name it. My hands were numb. The smell of frozen pine and damp earth filled the air. Each exhale lingered, twisting into the mist, wrapping around my chest, pressing cold and slow. The shapes moved again, closer this time. I could see them in my peripheral vision, long shadows that bent unnaturally, stretching between trees. I tried to steady my breathing. The frozen air made it sharp and shallow. The mist swirled thicker now, curling around my ankles, my shoulders almost tactile against my skin. I stopped, held my breath. The rustle returned, soft, deliberate, almost teasing. I listened, nothing but the fog moving in silence. I exhaled slowly. The cloud of my breath lingered too long. Thick, heavy, twisting like smoke. The shapes were gone. Or maybe they never were there. The forest pressed close, cold and silent. The mist wrapped around me, still and waiting, and I kept moving, each step careful, soft, aware that I was never truly alone. The fog pressed close to the trail, cold and damp. The smell of wet earth and moss hung in the air. I saw it first at the edge of my vision, a figure, mirroring my movements. I stopped. It stopped, a human shape, but stretched wrong. Limbs too long, shadows bending unnaturally. I stepped backward. So did it. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. Branches rustled overhead. Mist curled around my boots. Each step I took was matched silently. Every heartbeat pressed to my chest. I ran, fast, careful, through mud and roots. The figure kept pace. No sound, only the soft whisper of fog and breath. I dared a glance. There it was, always at the periphery, a shape not fully solid, yet undeniably following. My lungs burned. The cold wrapped around me, pressing into my skin. The mist curled into my hair, into my sleeves. The trail twisted, unfamiliar, yet endless. I stopped suddenly. The shadow stopped too. I held my breath. The forest was quiet, and yet every sense screamed. Then it vanished. No figure, no silhouette. Only the fog remained, dense, silent, and heavy. I moved slowly, every step careful. The trail seemed wider now, empty, but the memory of the shadow lingered. The forest waited, breathless. Still, I walked on, each footfall muted, aware that the fog could hide it again anywhere at any moment. The trail stretched through the pines, damp and quiet. Fog hugged the ground, curling over roots and fallen needles. The air smelled of wet wood and cold earth. Tiny lanterns flickered far along the path, swinging gently, though no breeze stirred. They glowed pale, warm against the gray mist. I felt drawn toward them, and yet a pull in my chest urged me to flee. Each step forward pressed into silence, soft and careful, into wet moss and loose pine needles. Shadows stretched unnaturally from tree to tree. Branches bent in ways that made no sense. The fog wrapped them, folding darkness into itself. The lanterns hung above it all, suspended, almost alive. I drew closer. The light swayed, beckoning, but no human presence could be felt. The air tingled with something unseen, cold and sharp beneath the warmth of flames. The forest seemed to watch. The hum of the wind, the rustle of leaves, even the soft thump of my heartbeat felt amplified in the fog-heavy silence. I held my breath. The lanterns moved in rhythm with the fog. Shapes shifted around them, elongated, folding shadows across the moss and stone. A faint metallic scent mingled with the wet pine. The lanterns were not human-made. I could feel it instinctively. No firewood, no oil, no hand to hold them. Just their soft glow, alive in the mist. I stepped back, the fog thickened around my boots. Clinging, the lantern swung lightly, beckoning still, but I resisted the pull. Every instinct warned me to leave, and yet my eyes remained fixed on them. Slowly, I turned and walked away. The lights remained, suspended in pale fog. Shadows folded and twisted around the trees, but they did not follow. The path became empty again. The lanterns dimmed slightly in the distance, like breathing, watching, patient. And though I moved on, the memory of their glow lingered, soft, eerie, as if waiting for me to return. The forest pressing around me. Fog curled low to the ground, damp and cold. The scent of wet pine and earth filled the air. I fumbled with my old handheld radio. The device had long been silent. Then suddenly it crackled. Whispered voices leaked through static. Words I didn't recognize. Memories I didn't have. Yet each one felt directed at me, pressing against my chest. I froze. The hum of the forest seemed to quiet. Only the radio static whispered in my ears. The mist curled tighter around my legs, soft and insistent. I lifted the radio closer, hoping to make sense of it. The voices shifted, bending, stretching. Syllables twisted into meanings I couldn't grasp. The forest smelled colder, sharper, metallic. I dropped it. It hit the ground with a muted thud, but the hum lingered. The static pressed, hovering in the fog like an unseen presence. Soft rustling behind me. Branches brushing together, but no wind. No animal. Only the echo of voices trapped in the radio, following me through the mist. I tried to walk away. The hum followed. Each step pressed into silence. The fog wrapped tighter, clinging cold against my skin, damp in my hair. I looked down at the fallen radio. The static pulsed softly, like a heartbeat or a whisper in rhythm with mine. I took a deep breath. The forest seemed to lean in closer, expectant, patient, its presence pressing through every shadow. The radio lay still on the moss, but I could feel the hum in my chest. Every sense heightened, smell of wet pine, chill of fog, the brush of unseen branches. Slowly I walked on, every step careful. The whispers faded with distance, but the memory of them lingered, soft, unsettling, patient, as if the forest itself had spoken, and I was the only one listening. The trees thinned. The fog clung low to the earth. I smelled damp wood and rot before I saw it. A cabin appeared. Rusted nails, moss-covered roof, wood rotting into the earth. The air felt heavier, colder, pressing into my lungs. The door creaked. No wind stirred. Only the slow, deliberate groan of old wood. I stepped closer. The smell of mold, dust, and decay rose into my nose. Soft moss pressed under my boots, cold and damp. Inside, shadows danced across the walls, not flickering from flame, but moving, alive. Shapes bent and stretched with every breath I took. The darkness itself seemed to lean closer. I felt watched, every muscle tensed. Though no one was there, the silence pressed in, thick and patient. A floorboard groaned under my step. Dust swirled in the pale light. I could see the outline of a broken chair, the curve of a collapsed table. The cabin had been abandoned for years, and yet it held presence. Soft, static-like hums rose from the shadows. The air smelled of cold iron and wet wood. I ran a hand along the wall. It was slick with age, damp with condensation. The shadows shifted again. Not random, deliberate. I stepped back, careful. The door groaned softly, echoing the emptiness. I moved toward the cabin's corner. Each breath hung in the air, thick and visible. The floorboards creaked under careful weight. Every shadow pressed in from every angle. I turned toward the door. The cabin remained still. The shadows folded into themselves. Yet the feeling persisted that I was not alone. I left slowly. The door swung gently behind me. The smell of rot and damp lingered on my coat. The fog closed in again, and the cabin faded into mist. Still watching, silent, waiting. The fog lay thick along the trail. Cold, damp, smelling of wet pine and soil. Each step pressed softly into moss and mud. A sharp cry pierced the mist. Animal-like, raw. It cut through the quiet, echoing off unseen hills. I froze. The sound trembled in the air. It repeated closer, farther, sometimes mimicking the rise and fall of my own voice. The forest held its breath with me. Each echo pressed against my chest. Shadows stretched along the trees, bending in impossible ways. I moved slowly. Every footstep pressed into silence. The mist curled around my boots, damp and cold. The echoing cry repeated, twisted, unnatural, sometimes rising in the shape of my own words. Branches scraped together. The smell of wet wood and decay filled my nostrils. The fog shifted, brushing my skin, and the cry followed, patient, deliberate. I held my breath. The sound mimicked me again. A syllable I thought I had only whispered, now carried back by the fog, stretched, warped, alien. I dared a step forward. The mist pressed closer, damp against my arms. The cry bounced off the unseen hills, repeating, layering, like a chorus of voices I could not place. I stopped. The echo held in the air, vibrating, watching, waiting. The forest pressed in from every side. Every sense heightened. Cold fog, sharp smell of pine, brush of wet leaves. Then silence. Only my own shallow breathing. The echo had faded, yet the memory lingered, wrapping the forest in quiet dread. I walked on slowly, each step soft, careful, through the lingering fog. The cry had gone, but the forest remembered it, and I felt the echo in my chest long after the sound disappeared. The snow lay fresh and untouched, cold, soft, clinging to my boots. The forest smelled of frost and pine, crisp and sharp. I noticed the footprints first, alongside mine, identical, yet wrong. They followed each step I took. Every print pressed deep into the snow. The shape was familiar, but something about it twisted, unnatural, distorted. I stopped. The forest remained silent. No rustle of branches, no snapping twigs, only the soft crunch of snow under my boots. I looked back. The footprints ended abruptly, as though whoever or whatever had simply vanished. The cold pressed into my arms. The fog curled low along the trail, twisting around tree trunks and roots. Each breath hung in the air, thick and white. I moved forward, every step cautious, careful. The snow whispered underfoot. The silence behind me felt heavier with each step. I glanced back again. Nothing, just the forest, frozen and still. Shadows pressed between the trees, bending with the pale light of the sky. The footprints lingered in my mind. How could they follow exactly? Then stop while I kept moving. The thought pressed against my chest, tight, cold. I kept walking. The snow held my steps softly, but the memory of those prints clung, echoing like a whisper I could not shake. The trail stretched ahead, empty, silent, cold. Yet I felt the echo of those prints beside me, the forest watching, patient. As I disappeared into the white fog, the moon hung pale above the pines. Fog curled around the roots and fallen needles. The air smelled damp, earthy, cold against my skin. Shadows shifted, not from the trees, not from the moonlight. They moved independently, twisting and stretching unnaturally. Each step I took cast something unfamiliar, shapes that didn't belong. Fingers of darkness, scraping across the snow and moss. I paused. The forest held its breath with me. Branches rustled without wind. The air hummed softly, almost like a warning. I moved again. Shadows lurked just beyond my vision. When I tried to focus, they vanished. A blank space, empty yet watching. The ground was soft underfoot. I could feel the frost seeping through my boots. The scent of wet pine hung heavy, sharp in the cold air. I turned slowly. Nothing, just fog curling along roots and stones. The shadows waited, patient, flickering at the edge of perception. My breath formed clouds. They swirled into the fog, and within them, shapes moved, slowly, deliberately, just beyond reach of my eyes. I stopped again. The silence pressed against me. No wind, no animal, only the soft shift of shadows. They clung to the edges of trees, rocks, and fog. Every sense sharpened. The cold pressed into my skin, the damp earth underfoot, the rustling branches in the fog. The shapes followed, never fully revealed, like a memory I could almost recall, but never quite. I walked on carefully, step by careful step, through the flickering shadows. The fog swallowed the forest around me, but the shapes remained patient, stretching, shifting, waiting for me to look. And though I could not see them clearly, I felt them in the air, cold and heavy, as if the forest itself had learned to breathe with me. Fog clung low to the ground. Every breath hung thick in the cold air. The forest smelled of wet pine and frost. A low growl rolled through the mist. It vibrated in my chest, slow and steady. The trees seemed to lean closer, listening. I froze. A pale shape emerged from fog. A hound, massive and thin, its fur almost white against the gray mist. Its eyes glowed faintly, distant and unreadable. It circled slowly, sniffing the air, its nose tracing paths invisible to me. The mist curled around its limbs, damp and cold. I could see each breath, each soft step pressing into the snow and moss. It didn't attack. It didn't make a sound beyond the growl that hummed through the forest. Just watched, measured, waiting. I held my breath. The fog swirled between us, curling around trees, roots, and rocks. Its eyes followed me, patient, unblinking. A scent of wet earth and something metallic drifted faintly on the cold air. I stepped backward slowly. The hound followed, circling, sniffing, never breaking the rhythm of its quiet inspection. Its presence pressed into my chest like the fog itself. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The mist swallowed it whole. Only the faint echo of a growl lingered, soft and low, fading into the fog. I stood alone. The forest was silent. Snow and frost clung to boots and sleeves. Yet the feeling of being watched, measured, lingered, as if the hound's gaze had imprinted itself into fog, waiting for me to move again. I walked on slowly, step by careful step. The mist shifted around me, cold and patient, and the forest seemed to breathe with my own uneven heartbeats. The trail stretched ahead, narrow and lined with frost-laden pines. The air was cold, damp, smelling faintly of wet earth and decaying leaves. Fog pressed close to the ground, curling around roots and rocks. Then I saw it, a doorway, standing alone in the middle of the trail. No walls, no building, just a frame, pale with darkened by dampness. I stepped closer. The fog poured to the opening, thicker and heavier than the surrounding mist. It smelled different, warm, faintly metallic, like iron and smoke. A breath grazed my neck. Soft, warm, almost human. It made the hairs on my arms rise. A pull, quiet and insistent, tugged at my chest. I felt compelled to step inside. The world beyond the doorway shimmered. The fog thickened, dense and almost liquid, curling around my boots. I could hear faint rustlings, distant and subtle, beneath the haze. I reached for the frame. The wood was cold, damp, rough against my fingers. The fog whispered around me, carrying a soft hum I couldn't place. It smelled of earth, of rain, of something older, something waiting. Step by step, I moved closer, each breath fog in the cold air, mixing with the mist spilling from the doorway. Shadows shifted at the edge of vision, pale and long. I hesitated. The pull remained, warm and insistent at my chest. The fog pressed closer, brushing my cheeks, the damp cold seeping through my coat. A quiet tension hummed in the air, subtle yet heavy. I thought I heard faint footsteps beyond the doorway, soft, deliberate, echoing in the fog. Yet when I strained, there was nothing, only the empty haze swirling in the cold air. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath. Branches rustled without wind. Snow and frost underfoot were silent. The fog from the doorway curling around me, patient, waiting. I stepped closer still. The doorway loomed, its pull stronger now, warm against the frost. I felt drawn to cross the threshold, to enter the unknown that waited beyond the frame. And yet, a shiver ran down my spine. The forest behind me was silent, holding me in a frozen stillness. The doorway breathed fog, warm and heavy, curling into my hair, my sleeves, my chest. I didn't move. I just stood, breath clouding in the cold. Fog swirled around the frame, shifting shadows at the edges, silent, patient, waiting. The forest pressed close. Mist curled over the stream, cold and pale. Water gurgled softly over moss-covered stones. I saw it first in the reflection. A figure, pale and still, standing across from me. It looked like me. Every line, every shadow, every shiver mirrored my own. I lifted my hand. It lifted its hand. I stepped forward. It stepped forward. The fog thickened, damp and heavy, curling around my boots and sleeves. Branches rustled silently overhead. The air smelled of wet moss and frozen earth. I blinked. The figure didn't blink. Its eyes were empty reflections of mine, or maybe something darker beneath. I moved closer to the stream's edge. Its movements mirrored me perfectly. The water shivered beneath its presence, though it had not yet touched it. A chill pressed against my chest. The forest held its breath. Even the fog seemed to pause, curling in place, listening. Then it stepped from the water. Mist wrapped around its long limbs. It moved with me, yet separately, like a shadow that had grown too solid. I froze. Every instinct screamed to run. But fascination held me. Curiosity, tinged with fear, rooted me to the soft, damp ground. Its gaze followed me. It mirrored my posture, my breathing, my smallest gestures. Even the soft crunch of leaves underfoot seemed shared between us. The fog thickened further, coiling around its frame, then around mine. The water rippled faintly, reflecting more than just the trees now. A shiver ran through me. The figure moved closer, slowly, deliberately, step by step, silent, as if it were learning, copying, breathing with me. I blinked again. When my eyes opened, it had vanished. The water was still. The fog swirled softly over its surface, hiding whatever had emerged. I remained at the stream's edge, alone, yet the echo of its presence lingered, imprinted in the mist and in the hollow silence of the forest. The fog pressed close, thick and damp against my skin. Each breath rolled out in white clouds that lingered longer than they should. The ground was soft beneath my boots, squelching quietly with every step. Then it began again, a low hum, vibrating through the soil, through the roots, through my chest. Not the wind, not the trees, something else entirely. It pulsed, steady and deep, wrapping around my rib cage. The mist seemed to thicken with the sound, coiling into shapes I couldn't name. Each step I took made the hum grow stronger, like it responded to me, like it waited for me to notice it fully. I paused. The fog hung like a curtain around the trunks. Branches twitched, though no breeze moved them. The air smelled of wet pine and earth, metallic under the pulse. The hum shifted, rolling beneath my feet. I felt it in my stomach, in my throat. It was no longer background. It was everything. I looked around, straining through the gray. Nothing. No shadow, no light, no form. Yet the sound was near, closer, filling every empty space. It was patient, insistent. A twig snapped under my heel. The hum wavered, almost startled, then steadied again. I swallowed, the taste of damp wood and cold fog clinging to my tongue. I moved forward, soft footsteps over moss and loose bark. The fog clung to my legs, as though trying to hold me back. The hum followed, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I turned sharply. Nothing, just fog curling over rocks and roots, the forest holding its breath. And still the hum. It pressed into my ears, vibrating along my jaw. I could feel it in the tips of my fingers. Every sense heightened, and yet I was alone. The fog parted for a moment. A faint pale light shivered through, but there was nothing there to cast it. Shadows stretched and bent unnaturally. The hum hummed around them, like it lived in the spaces between. I knelt, hand on the damp earth. The pulse ran through the soil, into my fingertips, and I felt, watched, not by eyes, but by the rhythm of the sound itself. I rose slowly, barely breathing. The fog clung tighter, pressing against my chest. The hum was louder now, insistent, filling the hollows of the forest, vibrating the very air around me. I took a step back. The hum followed. Step forward. It moved with me, not like an echo, but like a companion I didn't want. Then I stopped. The world held still. The fog, the trees, the soft pulse, everything. And for a single heartbeat, the hum softened, as though waiting for me to decide. I exhaled slowly, the mist swirling in small, ghostly eddies. The pulse lingered, fading just slightly, leaving a cold, empty silence in its wake. Alone again, but not quite. The fog still whispered. The hum still waited. The air smelled of damp leaves and cooling earth. The forest held its breath as the sun slipped behind the horizon. Shadows lengthened, spilling over roots and rocks, but there was a light, pale, almost unreal, glowing between the trees. I paused. The ground beneath my boots was soft, moss damp against my soles. The hum of the evening seemed to settle into silence. The light, it didn't belong here, yet it drew me forward, soft, insistent, impossible to resist. Branches scraped gently overhead, a distant rustle. I wasn't sure if it came from the wind or from the shadows moving within the glow. The pale light shifted as I walked. Shadows danced, bending in ways that didn't match the trees. A branch stretched upward. No! The shadow moved first, reaching higher, before the wood followed. I swallowed, tasting damp pine on my tongue. The forest seemed alive in small, quiet ways, a shiver through the leaves, a low vibration through the soil. I stepped closer. The light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat just beyond perception. I could feel it in my chest, a soft thrum echoing the rhythm of my own breath. Something moved in the corner of my vision. I froze. Shadows swirled around the glowing center, then retreated into the mist, leaving the light alone. The calm it offered felt unnatural, like standing on the edge of a dream I didn't remember. I wanted to look away. I wanted to run. And yet, I stepped forward. Fallen leaves crunched quietly beneath my boots, soft as whispers. The air smelled faintly metallic, like distant rain on iron. The fog curled around my leg, but the light remained steady and cold, casting the shadows into impossible angles. A branch snapped somewhere close. The light flickered, elongating the shapes of the trees, stretching them until they felt alien, until I felt like I was being observed. Not watched with eyes, but measured like the forest itself was breathing around me. I moved again. The glow seemed to breathe in rhythm with me. Step, pulse, step, pulse. It was mesmerizing, terrifying. The fog thickened, curling around trunks, and the shadows wavered, folding into themselves. I could feel the coldness seep into my bones, yet the glow offered warmth that wasn't warmth. I reached out my hand. The light recoiled slightly, as if aware of my presence. I stopped. The forest hushed completely. Even the rustle of leaves ceased. The glow stood still now, like a silent promise or a quiet threat, a deep inhale of mist and earth. I felt the pulse in the ground, in the fog, in the very air between the trees. It hummed softly, but no sound came from anywhere I could see. I exhaled slowly. The shadows bent one last time before settling, the light dimming imperceptibly. I stayed where I was, watching it fade into the evening, and felt alone, yet not alone. The forest was quiet again. The pale light lingered only in memory, and I walked onward, the hum of the forest pressing gently against my back. The trail was familiar. I had walked it for hours. But now it wasn't there. Rocks shifted underfoot, rearranging themselves. Roots twisted into new patterns, blocking the path I thought I knew. The forest smelled damp and earthy, yet stale, as if it had held its breath for centuries. I stepped forward, then stopped. Every direction looked the same. Trees stretching upward in endless repetition, fog curling between trunks. My heartbeat filled my ears. It echoed back at me from somewhere unseen, a deep, drumming resonance that didn't belong entirely to me. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm of panic. I reached out to steady myself on a tree. Its bark felt slimy, damp, and the cold seemed to seep into my fingertips. The fog clung to my skin, cold and wet, wrapping around my ankles as if the forest wanted me still. I turned left, then right. The trail should have curved toward a clearing. It didn't. Everything had vanished, erased by unseen hands. A rustle behind me. I whirled. Nothing. Only shadows stretched long and unnatural. The fog thickened. Each breath formed heavy clouds that lingered too long. I could see them twist and drift like small, spectral dancers. I could hear the forest exhale with me. Or was it just my own chest tightening? Step after step, the ground shifted beneath me. A stone that had been flat now jutted like a tooth from the earth. Roots blocked what I thought was a path. I stumbled over them, scraping my palms, tasting dust and decay. The sky dimmed. Light seemed to retreat into the trees, leaving the trail in shadow. I was alone. Completely. A branch snapped sharply. I spun, heart hammering. No one. The fog swallowed everything. Even the sound of my own voice seemed to vanish. I tried to retrace my steps. The trail refused to be found. I recognized nothing. Every landmark was gone, replaced by mirrors of trees, endless repetition, impossible angles. I breathed heavily. The cold fog mixed with my sweat, stinging my eyes. My hands shook. My legs ached. But I couldn't stop moving. The forest seemed to pulse. Each step echoed too long, too loud, as though the trail was mocking me. I could not escape. I could not follow. Then a silence deeper than any I had known. The echo of my heartbeat vanished. Only the fog remained, thick and unmoving, pressing against my chest like invisible walls. I stood still, fingers brushing against wet bark, ears straining against the hush. The trail had disappeared completely, and I realized it had never really been there at all. The fog pressed close, thick and wet. It wrapped around my arms, my legs, even my face. The forest seemed to lean inward, holding its breath with me. I felt it first on the back of my neck, a hot, unnatural warmth brushing against my skin. It was not the wind. It did not move like air. I stopped, turned slowly. Nothing, only the fog, curling to the trees, muffling each snap of a distant branch, each soft rustle of leaves underfoot. Step by careful step, I moved forward, and the warmth returned, soft, insistent, as though the air itself had awareness. Following me, pressing against me, I glanced over my shoulder. Empty space. Shadows stretching long and pale, twisting where the light should have been. The scent of damp earth filled my nose, but underneath it, something metallic, coppery, not strong enough to name, but enough to make my stomach tighten. Each breath came out loud in the stillness. Clouds of vapor lingered too long, drifting toward where I imagined it waited. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm of someone or something matching me. I tried quickening my pace. A flicker of panic in my chest. The warmth on my neck stayed the same, unmoving, persistent. I spun, head whipping through the fog. Nothing. Nothing moved but the faint swaying of branches. Yet the feeling remained, hovering close, brushing like a living shadow. A twig snapped behind me. I froze, ears straining, chest tight. A single beat later, silence. Only the fog curling and sighing around the trees. I whispered soft to myself. No answer. No echo. Only the pulse of my own fear. I reached out to touch a tree. Its bark was wet, rough under my fingers. The smell of moss and decay was sharp in the fog. And still, the breath lingered behind me. I tried to move sideways. The warmth shifted with me. Always just there, brushing, circling. A phantom tether I could neither see nor break. The forest held its quiet, dense and heavy. The fog seemed alive, pressing at my skin. Each step forward was an effort. Each exhale, a cloud too slow to vanish. And always behind me, the brush of heat. I stopped, tried to convince myself it was nothing, a trick of sweat, of imagination. But even as I told myself this, the heat pressed closer, a reminder that I was never alone. I dared not turn again. I dared not breathe too deeply. Only the fog, the cold earth, the damp tang of the forest, and the silent, insistent breath behind me. I moved forward, slowly, carefully, hoping it would vanish. It did not. The forest went quiet, not the usual quiet. Everything stopped. The wind held its breath. The fog froze in the air, pale and heavy. No rustle of leaves, no shifting shadow. I stood still, listening to nothing, not even my own heartbeat, though I knew it pounded. It felt muted, hollow. The pines rose endlessly around me, dark trunks stretching into the unseen sky. A faint smell of damp needles and old wood, cold, pressed into my hands and face. I tried to walk. The ground was soft with moss, but it felt like stepping on clouds of silence. Every footfall vanished before it landed. I called out softly, my voice swallowed instantly by the forest. No echo, no answer, only the suffocating emptiness. Light no longer existed here. Not sun, not moon, just a pale, diffuse gray that seemed to bend around me. Shadows clung to the trees, but offered no shape. I moved forward, though I did not know why. Each step carried the weight of endless space. I brushed against bark damp with unseen moisture. The smell of earth grew stronger, almost choking. The silence pressed closer. I could hear the static of my own breath, the tiny scrape of moss under my shoes, yet it sounded distant, not mine. I tried to focus. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow mirrored the last. The trail I thought I followed had vanished hours ago. I stopped, closed my eyes, hoping the forest would speak, hoping the wind or the fog or something unseen would stir. Nothing. I opened my eyes. Still alone, alone with the endless pines, alone with the oppressive stillness. The air was thick. It clung to my clothes, to my hair. I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and sharp. A subtle hum vibrated under my feet, or maybe inside my chest. I turned slowly. All directions looked the same. All directions led to more forest. I felt the weight of the trees, the static in the air, the quiet despair that pressed down like stone. I breathed, careful not to disturb anything. The fog shifted just enough to brush my arm, cold and soft, like a memory I couldn't place. Time no longer existed. Minutes, hours, gone. The forest itself seemed eternal. I thought I saw movement, a pale flicker at the corner of my vision, a shadow, maybe, or just my mind reaching out for life. But when I turned, there was only stillness. The silence grew deeper, heavier, until it was almost a presence that pressed against my skin, against my bones, against a part of me that still clung to hope. I took a step forward, then another, and another. The forest did not respond. It did not care. I was alone, truly impossibly alone. And yet, somewhere deep in the fog, I felt the faintest pulse of movement, or perhaps it was nothing at all. I did not turn to look. I did not call out. I only walked, slowly, endlessly, through the pines, through the fog, alone. The ridge rose before me, dark against the fading light. Fog clung to the pines, thick and unyielding. The ground beneath my feet was soft with moss, and every step whispered. I paused. The shadow was there again, watching, waiting, tall, pale still. Its presence pressed against the air, cold and heavy, yet almost familiar. The trees around it seemed to bend toward the ridge, their trunks murmuring in the silence. I stepped closer. Each footfall felt like a heartbeat in a void. The fog swirled around me, brushing my arms with chill and moisture. It carried the scent of wet pine and something older, earth deep and untouched. The shadow tilted its head. I felt it study me, and for the first time I understood I was no longer just a wanderer here. I was part of this forest now. The silence was alive. Not a rustle, not a hum, not a whisper. Something deeper, vibrating to the fog and the roots. A presence that pulsed with the rhythm of the ridge itself. I breathed slowly. Cold air filled my lungs and lingered. A soft shiver ran down my spine. The shadow mirrored the pull of my chest, the rise and fall of my shoulders, yet it did not move closer. I wanted to turn, to flee from the weight of its gaze. But the ground, the fog, the trees, they held me in place. I could not leave, even if I wanted. The light dimmed further, pale and thin between the branches. Shadows stretched toward me, folding into one another, becoming extensions of the ridge, of the forest, of the shadow itself. I stepped forward again. The moss was damp beneath my shoes. The air vibrated lightly, as if acknowledging me, welcoming me into the stillness. The shadow did not follow. It waited patient, eternal. Yet I could feel it through every fiber of the fog, through every leaf and stone beneath my feet. Time no longer existed. Moments blended with the hum of the ridge. I was both observer and observed, a whisper in the endless silence, a part of the forest's breathing. I knelt, touching the earth. Cold seeped into my fingers, into my bones, and I realized the forest had claimed me completely. The fog shifted, and the shadow remained. Not threatening, not angry, just waiting. I exhaled slowly. The hum pulsed beneath the roots and stones, and I let it fill me. Let it remind me that I belonged here, to this ridge, to this silence, to this shadow. I looked up once more. It was still there, watching, waiting, and I no longer felt fear. Only the quiet acceptance of being part of the forest, part of the ridge, part of the shadow. The fog curled around us both. The wind did not return. The forest held its breath, and we waited together,